They say that when you build a house, you leave a piece of your soul in the mortar. For 40 years, I've been a builder. I know the way steel groans under stress, the precise tension of a load-bearing wall, and exactly how long it takes for a foundation to settle. I built this home in 1986, brick by brick, beam by beam. I spent my weekends here while my children were still in diapers, dreaming of the day they'd grow up and call this place their sanctuary. I was naive. I wasn't building a home. I was constructing a monument to my own replacement. My name is Arthur. I'm 78 years old, and last Thursday, my children decided that I was officially obsolete. I was sitting in the den, the room where the fireplace I hand-laid still holds the warmth of 1,000 winters. My knees were locking up again, a nagging, dull ache, so I remained perfectly still, watching the dust motes drift in the late afternoon light. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic clink of glassware coming from the kitchen. My son, Marcus, and my daughter, Elena, were having a drink. They thought I was lost in my own senility, staring at the wall. They didn't realize that in this house, I know how the floorboards creak. I know every acoustic pocket. I can hear a whisper in the kitchen from the deepest corner of this room. "He's just taking up space, Marcus." Elena's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clinical, like a surgical blade. "Look at him. He sits there for hours. A statue. It's rotting the value of the house. We could knock out this fireplace, modernize the entire wing, and easily list it for $2 million. But he's stubborn. He clings to this place like it's his throne. He's more than stubborn, Elena. He's a liability," Marcus replied. The ice in his glass rattled as he swirled his drink. "If he slips on those hardwood floors, we're the ones facing the insurance lawsuits. It's negligent to keep him here." I found a spot at Pineview, the minimal care wing. We tell him it's for a month while we do structural repairs. Once he's gone, we change the locks, we list the property, and we divide the profit. He won't even know what hit him. A cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. I didn't feel rage. Rage is for men who still have something to lose. I felt the slow, agonizing realization of a structural failure. I had poured my life into them, sacrificing every vacation, every luxury, to ensure they had a rock-solid start. In return, they were treating me like a cracked beam that needed to be demoed. Marcus stepped into the den, his face morphing instantly. He smoothed his tie, adjusted his posture, and draped a sickening layer of fake empathy over his shoulders. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice dropping into that patronizing, slow cadence people use when they think you've forgotten your own name. "You doing okay? You look lost. Why don't you let me take you to the patio? The air might help clear your head." I looked up at him. I saw the designer watch on his wrist, the expensive haircut, the arrogant set of his jaw. He was a man who had never held a shovel, never sweat through a shirt, never built a damn thing in his life. He saw an old man whose brain was turning to mush. He didn't see the man who knew exactly which floor joists were rotten, or the fact that the entire legal title to this land was still and would always be the only thing I truly owned. If you've ever poured your life into people, only to have them treat you like a piece of furniture they're ready to sell at a garage sale, you know this feeling. It's the kind of betrayal that makes you want to tear the world down. If you're ready to see how a man who built his family from the ground up handles those who try to demolish him, hit that like button. Let's see how many of us know what it's like to be pushed too far. "I'm fine, Marcus," I said, my voice as calm as a plumb line. "I was just thinking about the future. It's funny how quickly things can change, isn't it?" He smiled, a tight, predatory thing. "Don't worry about the future, Dad. We've got everything handled." He walked away, leaving me in the silence. He thought he was the one holding the hammer. He didn't realize I was the one who had written the blueprints. The next 3 days were a masterclass in performative care. Elena and Marcus moved around the house with the frantic, forced energy of people playing a part in a low-budget stage play. They brought me supplements I didn't need, turned the television to channels I never watched, and spoke to me in that nauseating, sugary tone reserved for the dying. I played my part perfectly. I slumped in my chair. I let my gaze wander. I even forgot to eat my lunch on Wednesday, just to hear them whisper about how fast my cognitive decline was accelerating. They thought I was a crumbling ruin. They didn't see the engineer working beneath the surface. While they were out finalizing the arrangements for my new life in Pineview, I was busy with my own arrangements. I didn't need a private investigator. I had spent 40 years in this county. I knew every clerk, every surveyor, and every contractor who had ever bid on a project here. I spent my afternoons in my home office, the only room in the house where I'd installed a high-security lock, telling them it was for my valuable business files. I spent hours reviewing the mountain of paperwork I'd meticulously filed away since 1986. The house was mine. The land was mine. But that wasn't the leverage I needed. I pulled out a tattered folder from the very back of my filing cabinet. It contained the original blueprints and the inspection reports from when I'd built the house. Tucked behind the architectural drawings was a series of notarized documents from 10 years ago. Documents I'd drawn up when Marcus had first approached me, begging for money to cover a bad investment in an offshore scheme. I'd helped him then, but I'd been smarter than he gave me credit for. I'd set a contingency. If you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most has been secretly building a case against you, hit that like button. We're about to see what happens when the architect decides it's time to inspect the structural integrity of his own children's greed. That evening, I heard the heavy thud of the front door. They were home. It was time for the final act. I walked into the kitchen, my gait steady, my mind sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus and Elena were hunched over the kitchen island, looking at a glossy brochure for Pineview. "Dad!" Elena chirped, closing the brochure with a snap. "We were just talking about you. We've set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. They're expecting you." "A meeting?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Marcus laughed, a hollow, grating sound. "It's for your own good, Dad. You're not safe here anymore. You're becoming a liability to yourself." "A liability," I repeated, tasting the word. "You know, Marcus, I remember when you were 8 years old. You broke a window playing baseball. You lied to me for 3 days until you couldn't stand the guilt and came to me crying. I didn't get angry. I told you that a lie is like a crack in a foundation. It doesn't seem like much, but given enough time and enough pressure, it will bring the whole house down." Marcus stiffened, his smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about structural integrity," I said, my voice quiet, almost conversational. "I've been doing some inspecting of my own these past few days. I found some very interesting cracks in the way you've been handling your finances. Tell me, Marcus, does the bank know that the investment firm you've been running is nothing more than a series of shell companies meant to siphon money from my accounts?" The silence that followed was absolute. Elena dropped her glass. It shattered on the tile, a jagged, beautiful mess. Marcus's face drained of all color, his arrogant veneer cracking wide open. You don't know anything," he stammered, his bravado replaced by the stuttering fear of a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. "I know everything," I said. And for the first time in 3 days, I straightened my back, looking at them not as my children, but as two poorly constructed projects that were about to be condemned. "And tomorrow morning, we aren't going to Pineview. We're going to have a very different kind of meeting." The morning of the meeting arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete. I had instructed them to be ready at 9:00 a.m., but I didn't tell them where we were going. I let them think I was finally capitulating, that I was going to sign the papers to surrender my house and my autonomy. The anticipation in their eyes was disgusting, a mix of triumph and impatience. We didn't head toward Pineview. I drove toward the city center, toward the glass and steel monolith where Marcus kept his consulting firm. "Dad, what are you doing?" Marcus asked from the passenger seat, his voice tight. "The facility is the other way. We're making a stop," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "I have a few accounts I need to square before I move into a minimal care room." Elena, sitting in the back, leaned forward. "This is a waste of time, Arthur. Just sign the papers." I didn't answer. I pulled into the parking garage of his office building. I hadn't stepped foot in here in years. We took the elevator to the 14th floor. The lobby was all white marble and hushed voices. It screamed prestige, the kind of place that Marcus loved to flaunt. When we walked into his office, he went straight to his desk, clearly expecting to finish this quickly and get back to his fraudulent business. He reached into his drawer, pulled out the guardianship forms, and slid them across the mahogany. "Just sign, Dad." Get it over with. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I pulled a thick, heavy envelope from my coat pocket and dropped it onto the papers. The sound of it hitting the desk was deliberate, solid. "What's this?" Marcus scoffed, opening the flap. As he pulled out the documents, his face shifted through a spectrum of colors from pale to red to a sickly, translucent gray. They weren't just bank records. They were printouts of every wire transfer, every shell company registration, and more importantly, the notarized contingency agreement I had signed 10 years ago. It stipulated that if any attempt was made to seize my assets without my mental capacity being verified by two independent, court-appointed physicians, the loan I had given him would be called back immediately, with interest, and all properties he occupied would revert to my sole possession. You track this?" Marcus whispered. "You track these transfers?" "I'm a builder, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the office. "I know how to read a ledger just as well as I know how to read a blueprint. You thought I was staring at walls? I was watching the infrastructure of your greed. You built your life on a foundation of theft. Thinking I was too old to notice the settling, Elena stood by the door, her hands trembling as she realized the brochure for Pineview was now nothing more than trash. "We can talk about this, Dad," she started, her voice losing its clinical edge. "It's a misunderstanding. We were just. You were protecting me?" I finished for her. "No. You were insulating your own selfishness." I walked over to his computer, sat in his executive chair, and logged in using the password he'd used for years, my own birthday. He'd always been too arrogant to change it. With a few clicks, I initiated a transfer, moving the remaining liquid assets from his accounts back into my own. "I've already contacted the authorities," I said, looking up at him. "They're not here for me, Marcus. They're here for the audit. Everything you own, every suit in your closet, every share of this company, it's all being frozen. By noon, this office won't belong to you. By tomorrow, you'll be looking for a foundation of your own to stand on, and I suspect you'll find you don't have the skill to build one." If you've ever watched someone who thought they had all the power realize they've built their entire success on sand, you know the kind of satisfaction this brings. If you're ready to see how the final piece of the house comes crashing down, hit that like button. It's time to see if they can survive without the person they tried to discard. Marcus lunged, his face twisted in a mask of primal rage. But the office door opened. Two men in dark suits stepped in. Not police, but the auditors I'd hired 3 months ago. They looked at Marcus with the indifference of people who deal with white-collar criminals every day. "Marcus Gresham?" one of them asked, holding up a badge. "We have a few questions about your tax filings." Marcus collapsed into his own chair, his hands covering his face. The foundation hadn't just cracked. It had disintegrated. The aftermath was not a grand explosion, but a quiet, settling dust. By the time the auditors finished their work, the Gresham consulting office was a ghost town. Marcus and Elena were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of legal bills that would take them decades to pay off. They didn't even have the dignity of a fight. They were simply dismantled, piece by piece, by the truth. I didn't stay to watch them beg. I didn't stay to listen to the apologies that were really just masks for further manipulation. I walked out of that building and breathed in the city air. It tasted like dust and exhaust, but to me it tasted like oxygen. I returned to the house one last time. It felt different now. The fieldstone fireplace didn't look like a tomb. It looked like a structure, a strong one. I didn't need to live in it anymore. I had sold it to a young couple who actually asked me how I'd managed to keep the roof so perfectly leveled after all these years. I gave them the blueprints, the original manuals, and a piece of advice. Take care of the foundation, and the rest will stand on its own. I left the keys on the granite countertop. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway. I spent the next 6 months traveling. Not to escape, but to finally see the things I'd spent 40 years building for other people. I drove through the national parks. I stood on the bridges I'd welded together in my 30s, and I sat on the shores of the Pacific, listening to the tide erase the footprints I left in the sand. People ask me if I'm lonely, now that I'm 79 and my children are no longer in my life. They ask if I regret the way it ended, if I wish I had just let them take the house, let them shove me into Pineview, and kept the peace. I tell them the same thing every time. Peace built on a lie is just a slow-motion collapse. You can't build a relationship on the shifting sands of manipulation, and you certainly can't build a family on a foundation of greed. If I had stayed quiet, I would have died as a ghost in my own home, a man discarded because he was no longer useful. Instead, I chose to be the one who held the sledgehammer. My daughter Lorraine keeps in touch. She wasn't part of the scheme, and she's the only one who still carries the name Gresham with any semblance of pride. We meet for coffee once a month. She's the only foundation I have left, and I'm proud to say it's a solid one. I'm sitting on the porch of a small cabin in the mountains now, watching the sun set over the ridge. I don't have much, but I have my integrity. I don't have a company, but I have my hands. And for the first time in my life, I don't have to worry about who is waiting for me to fall. If you've learned anything from my story, let it be this. Don't ever let the people you love use your kindness as a tool to dismantle your worth. Sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is to stop holding the structure together for people who are only waiting for you to leave so they can strip it for parts. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more about finding strength in the later years of life, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments. What is the one thing you've built in your life that you're most proud of? And if you want to support the channel, you know where to find the donation link. Now, if you want to see what happens when the tables turn in other stories, there are 2 videos popping up on your screen right now. Choose your next lesson. I'll see you there.